in their flop hat uniform. The P Stone Nation is one result of neglect. The Nation is a federation of 30 Chicago gangs. They're called Rangers, and there's an estimated 5,000 of them. They may have as many guns as the entire Chicago Police Department, and they're recruiting faster. Detective Richard Peck was one victim.
The Rangers are out to kill me. They still send kites. Kites means that they send word to me that they want to get me. They said they will get me. And they are outlaws. They extort money, rob people, and they do not like authority. I was going south, driving southbound on Woodlawn, and at 61st Street, I noticed about 5 or 6 Rangers with guns. And as I stopped my car, told them I was a police officer, and as I did that, they pointed the gun at me and started to fire. I hollered for help from the street, from the people, and they would not come to my aid. I drove myself to the hospital. When I got to the hospital, blood was running out my head, chest, and all over. I was hit 15 times.
Chicago police officer Richard Peck was shot 15 times by members of the Black P Stone Nation in March 1969, but our story starts a decade earlier. Jeff Ford and Eugene Hairston are often credited with forming the Blackstone Rangers in Chicago's Woodlawn neighborhood in 1959, but the truth is a little more complicated. By 1955, black migration from southern states increased on the south side of Chicago. The Woodlawn neighborhood began its early transition from a majority white community to a majority black neighborhood. This was the year where white flight really took off, as whites decided to no longer invest in this community, and they took the local economy and profitable businesses with them. This was also the year when racial tensions began to really heat up between newly arrived southern black families and white families that didn't want to leave yet, or couldn't leave yet. In the early 1950s, racial tensions and protests against southern blacks led to many confrontations with white greaser gangs. Eventually, black youths in Woodlawn stood up to greaser gangs by creating a gang of their own. This gang was known as the Players, or Junior Players. In 1955, the Players were reorganized as a gang and renamed after the street where most members lived, the Blackstone Raiders. The Raiders were connected with black syndicate groups that controlled the numbers racket, which is an illegal daily lottery. So, the Raiders were able to obtain firearms and hustle on the side. At this time, the Raiders were engaged in a bitter war with a white greaser gang known as the Rebels. In March of 1957, the Rebels made the newspapers as a group of them attacked a black youth named Alvin Palmer, who happened to be a Blackstone Raider gang member. In the newspaper, it wasn't known that Palmer was a Raider, therefore, it looked like just a random racial attack, as the gang of greasers beat Palmer to death with a large ball-peen hammer at the intersection of 59th and Kedzie, in the Gage Park neighborhood, while Palmer resided in Englewood. The trial was a big one and lasted for months, but eventually the greaser boys were convicted of the murder. What isn't often talked about is how the Raiders got revenge for Palmer's murder by gunning down a rebel sometime later. By 1958, the Raiders were fighting a black gang from the west side, the Egyptian Cobras, and one from Englewood, the Disciples, who were trying to gain a foothold in Woodlawn. Eugene Hairston was born on May 1, 1944, in Columbus, Ohio. His immediate family moved to the Woodlawn neighborhood in 1956, but he had a cousin on the west side of Chicago named Leonard Calloway, better known as Cal, one of 7 original founders of the almighty Vice Lord Nation. Under his cousin's tutelage, Eugene Hairston earned the nickname Bull, and started his own gang in 1959 at the age of 15 called the Harper Boys. Meanwhile, a 12-year-old boy, born in Aberdeen, Mississippi on February 20, 1947 named Jeff Ford, renamed the Blackstone Raiders, the Blackstone Rangers in November 1959, and fought the Harper Boys, Egyptian Cobras, and Disciples for control of his neighborhood. By 1960, older members of the Black Syndicate in Woodlawn organized the alliance between the teenagers in their hood. The Harper Boys were now members of the Blackstone Rangers, with Eugene Bull Hairston named as the president, and Jeff Fort, aka the Black Prince, was named vice president of the gang.
Why do we scream at each other? This is what it sounds
Once the Blackstone Ranger Nation was created in 1960, the template for the bylaws came from the vice lords, who were declared their first cousins, mainly due to actual family ties. The Rangers were more about black power than vice lords originally were, and this brought about African-rooted literature and symbols for the Rangers. The pyramid was chosen to symbolize their African ancestry. The four corners of the pyramid are four 90-degree angles that add up to 360 degrees, hence, how the 360 degrees concept was created. Each side of the pyramid had its own meaning representing earth, fire, air, and water. The pyramid is comprised of 21 stones, but the Rangers were calling each other Stone since the days of the Blackstone Raiders, and the governing council of the Stones, called the Main 21, does not always consist of 21 people. Eugene King Bull Hairston and Jeff Fort, the Black Prince, would do some time in a juvenile detention center in 1961. This was the first time Ranger leadership was locked away, but the Rangers continued expanding, thanks to the interim leadership of Charles Bear Edward Bay. The boys were let out in 1962, and received a large boost in size when they converted the Egyptian Cobras on the south side, under the leadership of Mickey Cogwell, into the Blackstone Ranger Nation as Cobra Stones. During the years 1962 until 1964, the Rangers experienced quite a bit of growth, multiplying into the hundreds in size, if not thousands, and absorbing several gangs into the Rangers, from the Robert Taylor homes on the low end, and Cabrini Green projects on the near west side, to black communities in the south suburbs. During the early years, the Rangers made a little money from small payments by older black criminals to do their dirty work, taxing drug dealers, pimps, hustlers, and gambling houses. Rangers also visited stores, and taxed store owners in exchange for protection from any rival gangs or other criminals. Young Rangers often worked for adult drug dealers moving product for a cut. Rangers leaders, Eugene Chief Bull Hairston and Jeff the Black Prince Fort, learned this from the older criminals, and passed it on to the boys coming up in the neighborhood as Rangers. The neighborhood syndicates had learned from Chicago's Italian outfit, and maintained strong connections to the mafia. This is how the Stones were getting their first connections to major organized crime. Before the Rangers controlled the pimping and drug dealing, the market ran rampant, and outside forces controlled these rackets. One of the biggest issues was when white customers would venture into the neighborhood seeking drugs and prostitutes. They would often become the victim of a crime in the area, and because that man was white, the police would come in cracking heads of many black men that had nothing to do with the crime. The Rangers wanted to put an immediate stop to this by keeping troublemaking whites out, and that meant cutting off white syndicates pimping women, and distributing drugs in Ranger-controlled areas, so instead, the gang could pimp women and sell drugs in their own neighborhood, killing their own people. The perverted geniuses of gang founders and leaders, Eugene King Bull Hairston and Jeff, the Black Prince Fort, was their ability to subvert social and community organizations, to help structure their gang into a cartel for criminal activities. One of the earliest of these efforts was a close relationship with Ed Woods, extension director of the Woodlawn Chicago Boys Club. Eugene King Bull Hairston and his prince, Jeff Fort, who was also called Angel, and Ed Woods, searched for a space where the gang could create a supervised teen hangout. They found their first location here, at Woodlawn Emmanuel Evangelical Lutheran Church, 6401 South Kenwood Avenue. The lot where the church edifice once stood is now an empty lot. This is how Reverend Otto Sotnock described the situation. In the summers of 1963, 64, and 65, gang activity had become a growing threat to residents and business people in South Chicago, which included Englewood and Woodlawn. I remember a block club meeting held in our church basement when we invited a youth officer from the Woodlawn police station to speak to us. Afterward, he begged me to do anything I could to get those kids off the street. By coincidence, Ed Woods, who was director of a detached worker program at the Chicago Woodlawn Boys Club, stopped at my office to ask if they could use our church facilities to open a center for the Blackstone Rangers, since the Boys Club building was in rival gang turf at that time, and the Rangers wouldn't go there. I agreed, and that was how my church and I got involved. We had about a dozen gang members the first night we opened. After that we had over 100, and the number grew ever larger after that. The Chicago Woodlawn Boys Club got funding to hire detached workers to mingle with the gang members, gain their confidence and encourage them to leave the gang, and either get into school, or some kind of legitimate career that put money in their pockets, since most of the gang members, given a choice, would rather not hustle. We had several success stories. One gang member said he always wanted to be a chef. Mr. Woods found him a job at Passavant Hospital, in the kitchen. To the best of my knowledge, the fellow left the gang, at least for a time. However, we learned that leaving any gang is difficult. It's like going AWOL from the army. In 1965, I left Chicago and moved to Minneapolis, where I became pastor of Lake of the Isles Lutheran Church. That summer was also a long hot summer on the streets of Woodlawn. Pastor John Fry became pastor of First Presbyterian Church at 64th and Kimbark. The interim pastor at Woodlawn, Emmanuel, was afraid to get involved with the gang, so Pastor Fry invited the gang to use his church facilities, just a block west of Woodlawn, Emmanuel. Reverend Fry wanted to connect with Jeff Fort, who was always the visible leader of the Rangers since the beginning, as Hairston was more behind the scenes. Therefore, Fort was the one to talk to. The church became a major hangout for the Rangers as they threw wild parties in the gymnasium, and even stashed several guns in the basement. Reverend Fry and other members of the clergy there said they had the intention of preventing gang wars between disciples and Rangers. However, the disciples were not taken in by the Reverend. Residents of the community, law enforcement, and even higher up religious figures were very suspicious of this relationship, and some critics even alleged that Reverend Fry committed criminal acts with the Rangers.
Former member of Chicago's Blackstone Rangers today supported Senator John McClellan's charge that the Office of Economic Opportunity made a big mistake in spending nearly $1 million to train that city's ghetto youth. Ex-warlord Rose told the committee that most of the money was spent not for education, but to support gang activities of extortion, prostitution, and dope peddling.
Now tell us, was any program carried on of literary instruction with respect to trying to teach them to read and to write, or to,
No, sir.
kind of like you would teach in school to improve their educational capabilities?
It was simply a way of paying our members for being members, so to speak. And
The way of paying your members for being members.
yes, sir.
Now, when they got their pay, what were they required to do with their money?
Well, at first, everyone was required to kick back $5.
That is $5 each payday.
Yes.
Rose gave damning testimony, too, about a white Chicago minister, John Fry, who gives sanctuary to the gang in his church.
We had pot parties there.
Hot parties.
Yes.
Smoking marijuana?
Yes.
I see. Go ahead.
We would reissue our weapons from there.
Did you keep weapons stored there?
Yes, sir.
In the church?
Yes.
Wow. George Rose, aka Watusi, but also called Mad Dog, was a member of the Stones Governing Council, the Main 21, and a snitch. He had a lot to say about the Stones' criminal activities too. Segregationist Arkansas Senator John McClellan, at a hearing in 1968, about the gang's relationship with Reverend Fry, which started in 1965. We're going to pause our story right here, and pick back up in the year 1966 because Jeff Fort, the Black Prince, would soon take the crown from Eugene King Bull Hairston. Smash that like button, subscribe to the Cartoon News Network, and ring that notification bell so you won't miss part 2 in our series on Jeff Fort.
That's why